Atheists and scientists believe that at the end of one's life, that's it. There's nothing else. But a horrific accident in 1989 would show Sarah that just isn't the way that it is. The ancient Egyptians called it Duat, the Roman Empire called it Orcus, and the Aztecs, Mictlan. Roughly translated, it's the underworld. It's the place that souls go after death. Today, it's generally referred to as the afterlife. And the debate about the afterlife has been raging ever since the beginning of time. On the one side, there's the strict prove-it-to-me types. They're often atheists, scientists, or just people who believe themselves to be practically grounded in the real world. According to the BBC, researchers say that near-death experiences are nothing more than manifestations of normal brain functions gone awry, and many common near-death experiences are caused by the brain's attempt to make sense of unusual sensations and perceptions that are occurring during a traumatic event. Psychologists from Edinburgh University and the Medical Research Council in Cambridge say that phenomena such as out-of-body experiences or encounters with dead relatives are simply tricks of the mind, and they're not at all glimpses into the afterlife. Dr. Caroline Watt, a near-death experience researcher, says that our brains are really good at fooling us. She says that some of the studies that she's done show that many of the people who claim to have had a near-death experience weren't actually in any real danger of dying. They just thought that they were, and then their brains gave them an experience of death when they weren't really even close. She contends that the scientific evidence suggests that all aspects of near-death experiences have a biological basis in reality. On the other side, there are those who say that there just must be something more. Many of them say that they feel more than just this physical world or what the five senses allow. They feel an eternal existence deep inside of them. Some of these people say that they've actually seen the other side. They've been there, experienced it. They've come back to tell us about it, and it most certainly is not some fabrication of the brain. In this video, we're going to explore the possibility that there just might be something more than this physical existence. And we'll do this by following the incredible journey of a woman who was the victim of a hit-and-run driver. She was slammed into while riding her bicycle, then knocked 60 feet into the air and left for dead. We'll share her memories of a dark, empty void, how she momentarily merged with pure evil, and then how she ultimately discovered that we all have a choice of how we experience existence. Then stay with us for our fact or fiction section. There, I'm going to take just a minute and give you my thoughts on this case. And then Amy is going to come on and she's going to share possible scientific evidence that there just might really be a soul. So, this story begins on a beautiful summer evening in 1989. Marin County, California is located just north of San Francisco, and it's filled with long country roads and stunning scenery. It's the perfect place to enjoy extended bike rides. One warm August evening in 1989, just after sunset, a young 27-year-old lady named Sarah finished up work and hopped on her bicycle, preparing to enjoy a pleasant ride home. There was still a faint amber glow on the horizon from the setting sun, and there was a nice breeze in the air. Sarah said that she remembered feeling really good that evening as she pedaled and glided down the road, but she did not remember being hit by the truck. She was responsibly in the bike lane and approaching the traffic light when it happened. A pickup traveling at about 80 kilometers an hour rammed into her bicycle from the back. Sarah and her bike shot forward and traveled 60 feet through the air. Her body literally bounced and then kept going. It scraped along the road as much of her skin was ripped off by the asphalt. Several of her ribs were broken and she was knocked unconscious. Most of her internal organs were ruptured. Her pelvic bone was busted, and she suffered a punctured lung. Doctors later said that at that point, she was just moments from death. Well, as fate would have it, a police officer just happened to be at that exact intersection when the hit and run took place. He quickly made his way to Sarah and then called for an ambulance. Help arrived and Sarah was taken to the hospital. Over the next 3 days, she remained in critical condition, and she flatlined 5 times, where doctors struggled to bring her back to life. Ultimately, she lost the use of her right arm, completely forgot many of her memories, including how to read and write, and she'd have to live in pain for the rest of her life. And although she struggled to remember events before the accident, she had no problem pulling up a clear and detailed recollection of what took place in another realm during the time that the doctors were fighting to save her life.
We're losing her. We're losing her. We're losing her. Turn up the defibrillator.
At first, there was nothingness, just an empty black void, and it was just as much on the inside as it was on the outside. As a matter of fact, concepts of inside and outside really had no meaning in this place. All there was blackness. Sarah described it as if she were in a big black box, but one without any walls, as if existence itself were nothingness. In this nothingness, time lost all of its meaning. Sarah just sat there alone for what could have been all of eternity or just a few minutes. Without anything changing, she really couldn't tell. And then she heard something. A sound that just might have been there in this darkness with her all the while, or it just might have shown up when she heard it. After a moment, she could tell that it was a buzzing sound, and it was getting louder. At first, Sarah couldn't tell where the buzzing was coming from. Maybe it was coming from everywhere, or maybe it was somehow just there, coming from nowhere, as if it were a permanent fixture in eternity. As she was pondering this, she noticed a very tiny, very faint pinprick of light. And she got curious. A moment ago, there was nothing, just emptiness, blackness, and Sarah. It was as if that was all there was in all of existence. But now, there was something else. The buzzing got louder, and this small dot of light got bigger. And as it did, Sarah could see that it was alive in some way. It was conscious, and whatever it was focusing intently and solely on Sarah, as if it were coming just for Sarah, and it was intending to crush her soul into oblivion. Now, at this point, Sarah still didn't understand where she was or what was happening. There was absolutely no memory of her previous life, and as this thing approached, she didn't even know how to move, or if movement were even possible. So once this consciousness got right up on her, she did the only thing that she could. She braced herself for whatever was going to happen next. She said that this consciousness was horrid. It was the most terrifying thing that she had ever experienced, before or since. She said that there really wasn't any way that one could describe it in our world. She used adjectives like huge, rage-filled, and overpowering. If one could compare it to the physical world, she said it might be thought of as having sharp, gnashing teeth, evil, soul-piercing eyes, and a huge body. It was just overpowering. It came right up to Sarah, and it stopped. She didn't have any eyes, but somehow she blocked her mind to it. And when she did, it touched her, and then slowly began to merge with her. She began to feel what it felt. She said that it was a feeling that could drive anyone mad. If pure evil could exist as an intention-filled being, well, this was it. She said that as their souls merged, she became one with pure evil. On the very brink of insanity, just before she completely lost her mind, it released its grip on her and she felt it exit through her back. It had approached her, moved into her, and then passed completely through her. As horrible as this temporary merging with evil was, however, it somehow gave her the motivation to move. And a moment later, she found herself hurling forward at a great speed. As she was moving, however, two more evil consciousnesses, just like the first, emerged as pinpricks of light at the very edge of her awareness. They too approached and then passed through her. She said that each experience was just as terrifying as the first, but they came and went. Soon, she would see a cloud-filled hallway with doors leading into other realms. Sarah continued moving forward through this blackness, and after a bit, a cloud-like structure way off in the distance came into view. Even though she was traveling at a very high rate of speed, it was so far away that it took her a good minute before she got there. As she was approaching it, however, she realized that it was massively huge, this towering structure of gray clouds setting in the absolute empty void of all eternity. When she got right up on it, she could see that it was actually the entrance to some type of gigantic hallway. Well, she stopped, looked inside. There were thresholds like doorways on both sides. From where she was, she could see that some of the thresholds were open and some were opaque, but she couldn't actually see into any of the open areas. In order to do that, she'd have to enter this hallway. At this point, she was finally able to soak this all in, and she looked around at the vast emptiness, and then back at this gray structure. And then finally, for the very first time, she turned her attention on herself.
I glanced down at myself and noticed that my body was gone. It had been replaced by a blue-white light, sort of equilimbed cross star that pulsed. This seemed natural and pleasant to me at the time. It was very freeing to no longer be attached to a weighty form.
She looked back up, and as she was contemplating what she was going to do next, two other blue-white stars moved up along each side of her, and they gently propelled her into this tunnel. She said that it didn't feel like they forced her to do this. She said it felt quite normal, whatever that means. Once she was in this hallway, she looked into one of these doors, and she said that what she saw was darker than any nightmare she could ever imagine.
There was the sound of shrieking and agonizing screams. Naked human beings were strewn about a blasted landscape with pools of bubbling excrement and jagged boulders. Devils and other animals were torturing people in all imaginable ways, and people were also torturing each other. As I neared the doorway to this sinister scene, I felt a sucking sensation drawing me in like a whirlpool, and the next moment, I found myself floating above the miserable landscape. The smell was putrid, and the heat was almost unbearable. But a part of me was fascinated by the seemingly infinite varieties of pain and anguish that was being inflicted on the inhabitants of this realm.
As she was floating there above this nightmare, she became afraid that she wouldn't be able to fight her way back through that whirlpool, and she might actually be pulled down into this suffering. But as she began to just think about leaving, she found that the whirlpool gave her no resistance at all.
Most of me wanted to leave, so I had no difficulty, and my feeling was that anyone could leave if they wished. I felt that no one or nothing had put those people in captivity except their own belief in the agony they continued to suffer. I flew back to the doorway, which was clearly visible from everywhere in the hell?
Back in the hallway, Sarah suddenly became overwhelmed with a profound sense of joy. She said that this feeling was so strong that for a moment she felt as if she actually became one with that emotion. At the exact same time, however, and during this entire experience, she kept a very clear sense of self. And later, when she returned, one of the messages that she wanted to share with the world is that when we die, we never lose our sense of autonomy. We don't merge into some type of collective consciousness and fade into oblivion. She believes that we each have a self and that we exist as ourself forever. Sarah continued down the hallway, and the very next room that she looked into was full of souls who somehow, although they were all together, found a way to live isolated from each other in a deeply profound sense of loneliness.
The next doorway in the tunnel wasn't much better than the first. As far as the eye could see, people walked on barren yellow ground with their heads down, completely engrossed in their own depressed, self-pitying thoughts, unaware that anyone else was around them. A great feeling of loneliness and isolation emanated from the scene. There was no sucking sensation in this room, and I only looked in for a moment and continued forward down the hallway.
Sarah continued down the hallway, passing doorways as she went. Some of them were open, and she knew that she could enter them if she chose to. Others were opaque, and those remained a mystery. However, something very interesting happened when she tried to enter one of the rooms that seemed to be the embodiment of beauty itself.
I flew along further up the tunnel and glanced in other doorways, but the next one that made a lasting impression on me was a world of almost indescribable beauty. I looked upon a beautiful wooded garden with fountains and waterfalls and streams and bridges that glowed and sparkled with iridescent colors. A feeling of peace and harmony flowed from this scene, and I moved toward the doorway with a great desire to enter. As I began to go through the opening, I encountered what felt like plastic wrap. I pushed forward but was gently rebuffed, and a voice said, "You do not have the information to enter this world." And at the time, I remember feeling disappointed, but not judged as unworthy, just uninformed.
Sarah's near-death experience continued, and the next part that she described was seeing a bright, powerful light just up ahead as the hallway curved. This light wasn't behind any of the doors. It was in the hallway itself.
I entered into the light and was transformed by a feeling of utter and absolute joy. There was nothing but joy. I said to the light, "I'm here." And the light said, "Great," in a voice that rang with happiness and bliss. I gave myself up to the bliss and learned many things that sound corny when described, but are truths for me that resonate through me now and forever. I learned that I'm eternal, and though I may experience many forms of death, I will always know who I am. I have nothing to fear, only more to experience, and I am the one that ultimately chooses what I experience. It sounds hokey, but believe me, it feels really, really good to know these things inside yourself.
After what might have been eternity, or just a few moments of her experiencing this joy, she found herself, now, check this out, longing for change, more adventure, something different. So, believing that she could return to this state of pure joy at any time she wanted to, she told the light that she was leaving to go on to more adventures. And the light said, "Great," and she left. Shortly after this, however, she'd return to her body, and then she would remember just how painful physical existence can be. Filled with this new knowledge, the sense of eternal self, and the ability to experience pure joy at any time she wanted to, Sarah floated back down the tunnel, and as she did so, she glanced into various rooms. Eventually, she came to one that looked like outer space.
Pieces of rock floated by, and in the distance, planets and galaxies spun and whirled. A rather conflicting feeling of both serenity and adventure surrounded me as I gazed upon the silent scene. As I floated next to the threshold, I could hear voices shouting, "Don't go, Sarah! What about your 5-year-old son, Zane?" At that moment, another being appeared beside me, and it was made clear to me that if I passed through this door, I couldn't come back. My next conscious memory was of lying in a hospital bed with uncountable tubes sticking into me and a respirator tube in my mouth. I was full of joy and humming with power, although I was unable to move any part of my body of my own volition. I was also full of pain, and that sensation quickly oriented me to my physical self again.
As soon as Sarah woke up in the hospital, she began sharing her experience with everyone she could. Orderlies, nurses, doctors, family members. But the more that she shared, the more everyone just kept telling her that it had all been just a very bad dream and she was okay now, she was safe. What made it worse was the fact that the accident had robbed her of so much. The damage done to her head had stolen many of her childhood memories, and it also took a lot of her education away. It took her years just to remember how to read and write again. Today, she still doesn't have the use of her right arm, and she lives in constant pain due to nerve damage. And although most of the hospital staff and many of her family members believe that it was just one big dream, she says that she knows otherwise. From the very moment that she woke up and every day after, Sarah lives in a constant state of gratitude and security, knowing that ultimately there's nothing to fear because she's an eternal being who chooses what experiences to have, and every moment is just an adventure. On February 4th, 1999, she appeared on the Art Bell Show and she shared her story with the world. Her experience can also be found at the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation website. In this report, we've done our best to share her story exactly as she tells it. So, what really happened with Sarah? Did her soul truly leave her body and go somewhere else? Well, for that to have happened, she'd have to have a soul, right? Many scientists today believe that the soul is nothing more than synapses firing in the brain, and when one dies, all that synaptic activity just stops. Most scientists today believe that near-death experiences are fake memories that come from the brain when it's under extreme stress. But as much as 15% of the population claims to have had a near-death experience at some point in their lives. And these people say that their experiences are so powerful and so real that they just can't be the brain playing tricks on them. Some people describe these experiences as being more real than what's here in this physical world. One thing about near-death experiences is that they are extremely personal and only experienced by that person. So, by their very nature, they lend little in the way of scientific evidence. And I think that one fault of science might be the tendency to not believe something because of the lack of evidence. But it's been said, I don't know how many times, absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. That being said, Amy just might have found evidence for the soul. So I'm excited for today because what you're going to share.
Yeah, I'm gonna, talk about just some light topics like, I don't know, consciousness, death, the soul. quantum mechanics.
Little light reading.
Little light reading.
What?
Yeah. And, I'll start with quantum mechanics because what is going on?
Right.
Right. The quantum world is absolutely insane. Things don't behave the way we would expect. And theoretical physicist Richard Feynman, there's a quote where he says something like, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
I totally felt that. It's like, yes, me, right here, right here.
Right.
But I want to start out with, in 1996, Dr. Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose, how cool,
Yeah.
started work on a quantum theory of consciousness. And I think that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in general, they contend that there are these microtubules in the brain that act like quantum computers, and they process information at the subatomic level.
Okay.
Right? How crazy is that? I'm getting visions of like Ant-Man going through my head as I'm talking about this.
Right.
Right. And so, possibly what we think of as the soul, or what people think of as the soul, could actually be this information in these microtubules.
So let me see if I understand this right. You're saying that so it's not scientific proof yet.
Oh no, not at all. These are theories.
But you're saying there's scientific theories and maybe a little evidence that what makes a person who they are is quantum information.
Yes.
Right? So scientists go, there's no soul. It's your synapses firing in the brain.
Right.
But you're saying this new theory suggests that it's not the synapses that are firing, but it's this quantum information in these, what did you call them?
Microtubules.
Microtubules.
Right.
And that quantum information, because it's quantum, it doesn't necessarily have to be local. So it could be connected with every part of the universe. And when a person dies, this quantum information continues?
It still continues, yes.
Okay.
It is.
And then if a person comes back to life, this quantum information that's been processing outside of their brain could remerge with the human.
Yes.
That just the hairs in the back of my neck just went up.
Yes. When you think about Sarah's experience where she flatlined more than once.
Yeah.
Maybe that is why she has, such an extensive experience. She has so many, I guess, I don't want to say things, but she has so much that she experienced. I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way you tell it, it just makes me think if we are at this level of understanding that we go, well, it's a theory and who knows, then maybe we're like in elementary school.
Yeah. Well,
and maybe the soul really is so much more than maybe it is information.
Right.
Right.
And maybe it is, they contend it goes on forever. It's energy. It doesn't stop. It doesn't have an end.
Right.
It's forever constant.
Yeah. And that's what Sarah said, right? So she said that she's convinced that each one of us have a self and that self goes on for eternity.
Right. Yeah.
And we just have different adventures as we go.
Yeah.
So I got to ask you, like I always do, what do you think about the story? What do you think about Sarah? In this one, there's no evidence that anybody could put forth. This is just Sarah waking up on the hospital bed telling her story. Do you think it happened? There
are so many what we call near-death experiences. I'm like, well, they did die, so it's kind of death experiences, but there are so many that come back with such similar, I don't want to say stories, but experiences. And then when I look at what happens with children who say they remember past lives, it really, that made the hair on the back of my neck go up, because I'm like, something is going on, something that we don't have a grasp of yet. We don't understand.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely something to all of this.
Yeah. And I remember, so you listened to the whole Art Bell story, right? The radio broadcast, and which we're going to put in the description.
Oh, the link? Okay.
Yeah, for everybody.
Yeah.
Right. So they can go hear it themselves. But hearing her talk, did you get a sense that she was being genuine?
Oh, absolutely. with her, and I've this has happened with other witnesses, whatever you want to call them, but it is her truth. There's no way she does not or cannot believe that anymore. She's like, this is how it is. It's her truth now.
Yeah.
So I absolutely believe her.
Yeah, that's cool. So you don't know if this really happened, but you believe that she believes it.
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
All right. Well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
So, did Sarah get a glimpse of the afterlife? The other side? This story reminds me a lot of what happened to Jenny Cockell. She didn't have a near-death experience, but she did grow up remembering what it's like on the other side. Before she was even 3 years old, she began having dreams and memories. These dreams were of herself, but as another person. She saw herself as an adult woman, married with several children. She even saw her own death. And then she saw what happens when we die. She saw eternity before she was reborn as Jenny. Jenny says that as she grew older, she felt compelled to seek out this other life and find out who she had been. Interestingly, along the way, she met several individuals who recognized her as this other person from her previous life. Her story is extremely fascinating, and we did a complete report on it. If you'd like to see it, it's here.
Thanks to these people who support us. And if you want to be on the list, well, go to the Buy Me a Coffee link somewhere here. I don't know.
Wow.
How am I supposed to know where it is?
That's good.
Yeah.
That's
well,
good.
it's like over there.